Hi everybody, welcome back. It has been quite some time since I have made a new video. I've actually been focusing on my Instagram account and more short form content, so please check that out if you haven't. It'll probably give you some laughs. At Wonderfully Wild Homeschool on Instagram and on TikTok. So what we are here to talk about today is the good and the beautiful, specifically the language arts curriculum. Now, I'm not here to say whether this is a good or bad curriculum, but I will give you some advice and pointers should you try to use this curriculum, because these are things that I didn't know and I wish that I knew, and I wish that I had somebody to tell me to think about these things while I was using it. So we have been using the good and the beautiful for quite a few years now. We have done preschool, kindergarten prep, language arts level, what is this? This is K. We have done level 1. And this is where we have paused. I did not buy level 2 for this upcoming year. So I can just speak to these levels, but I have used each of these levels a minimum of 3 times, if not 4 times, because I have 4 young kids that I'm homeschooling. So I do feel like I know this curriculum pretty darn well, and I have enough information to speak on it. So here goes. The kindergarten prep and the preschool, I thought these were really cute and my daughter really liked them. It was rather easy to get through. I almost feel like if you're going to move on from kindergarten prep to kindergarten, you need to be doing a little more than this, because this is a humongous jump from the pre-K to the kindergarten. The kindergarten, basically, you should already be reading CVC words, blending letters, and reading simple sentences in order to really get through this. So what I wish that I knew is to go ahead and purchase the kindergarten booster books and booster cards with the pre-K pack. I don't think I've ever heard anybody suggest that before, but if we could have already been working on these before we started with the kindergarten curriculum, that would have been really helpful, because there is just a huge leap from completing the preschool and the kindergarten prep. Before starting the course, master all of these blend sounds. Now, we have never worked on any blending, so this was a huge shock for us, and this is gonna take quite some time in order to master that. And if you're trying to start your school year and get this curriculum done in the 120 lessons, then it could really hold you up. But yeah, so these are also other blends that your 4 or 5-year-old, 6, whatever age you're going to start kindergarten, is expected to be able to blend these sounds before even starting. So if we were practicing this like the whole year before, or even the 6 months before, she would have been much more prepared to start. And I felt like she was starting behind, even though we had done the prep curriculum for this book. So if I could do it over, I would have purchased Booster Card A and Booster Card A books and been working on that simultaneously with the kindergarten prep book. I feel that that would have made a huge difference for all of my children in successfully completing that, with much less frustration for everybody involved. The next thing that I wish I knew and I wish that I had purchased was these nature readers. And there's a poetry one too, but I was so late to the game getting these. I actually didn't even get these till like 6 months ago, and we've been using the curriculum for years. I just figured, you know, why am I gonna buy more stuff? Why am I gonna spend more money? I already have, you know, those booster books. It should be plenty. But the truth is that there is 20 books in each pack, and you will only really have one book that is going to be focusing on one of the phonics principles that you're learning. So let's see, for example, I think some of these are mixed up from the other pack, but let's see. Okay, so just like for example, like this book is The Jet, and this is, they are focusing on where S says Z, Z. And yes, there will be, you know, repeated words and sequential books, but this is the only book that's really focusing on it. So when you have the nature reader, it has just like additional practice. So like, I don't know if you can see it, but chapter 5 is another one where S says Z. You're getting more exposure to more stories that reinforce that same principle that they are working on that week or that month. So I wish I knew that. I wish I knew that, you know, just doing this one book really wasn't going to be adequate when it comes to mastering a phonics principle. So having the companion and giving them more exposure really would have been helpful. So these are more just like suggested, but in my opinion, they are really a key player in the curriculum, and I wish I had these sooner. Another thing that I wish I knew was that I should have been supplementing additional writing. Now, as a new homeschool mom, I thought that this was just everything that we needed to do. However, the writing is extremely light. You know, it's just like writing, you see it, you know, just like write like a simple sight word, you know, just kind of like, you know, copy the word. There isn't a lot of copy work in the form of full sentences, which is something I regret not doing more of, because I feel like my kids are a bit behind in that area just because we really didn't do it and I didn't know to do it. I was just like following this, like, you know, exactly. So I would absolutely recommend getting some sort of additional or supplemental writing tool. They do have handwriting books, which we did all of those as well, but more just like writing actual sentences out. So if you can't find something you like, something you could do is just like write a sentence yourself and then have the child copy it. So like, today we went to the beach, period. And then have them copy that and I would do that probably every single time you sit down, just having them writing one sentence, at least, you know, starting in the kindergarten years, maybe by first grade, they're writing 2 sentences. But that is absolutely something that I wish that I had done more of and that I knew to do. And when it comes to reading, so this is the Booster B book pack. The booster cards I actually have on loan to a friend right now. But what I wish I knew, and again, I wish that it had this spelled out in the curriculum to prompt me to do it, because again, I just didn't know, was to ask comprehension questions when your kids are reading. And that may seem like really, you know, self-explanatory. Maybe, you know, you would have thought of that, but I didn't. So, and this is just an example, but this is actually one of my kids' favorite, is like the funny goose. And so, you know, as they're reading it or at the end, you know, the funny goose lives on the farm. So then at the end, okay, where does the goose live? Ask them, you know, what did the goose take from the little girl? Oh, she took the glove. What did the goose push into the lake? Oh, it was her bicycle. How do you think that made her feel? Just like think of those like who, what, why questions, something that I was not doing on my own until very recently. And as your kids are getting a little older as well, have them summarize whatever it is they read to you. Just say, tell me about what you read. What did you read about? And have them explain it to you, because believe it or not, that is actually a skill. To recall information in order is not something that a lot of kids just like figure out on their own. So that is something that has to be cultivated. And just another thing that I didn't know to do. Now I know. So that would be my big reading tip, is to ask comprehension questions, WH questions, and have your kid summarize what it is they read that day. The phonics also moves rather quickly. So what I ended up doing is 1 week we would do ELA, and the next week we would do math, and we would just double up our lessons. So we were still completing like the same amount in a month. But because the ELA was moving really quickly, we would have 2 weeks to review whatever it is, or to practice whatever it is that we had learned. So a lot of the phonics rules in English can be really difficult to understand. And a lot of times it's just like, oh, well, that's just how it is, just memorize it. But there actually is quite a few reasons and ways to remember different sounds, whether it's a diphthong or a vowel team. This curriculum is just not going to dive into the reasons of why. So it's just something to keep in mind, especially if you have a kid that isn't really just like picking up reading really quickly. That could be why, because some kids really need to understand why that vowel makes that sound. So that's something that worked for us, because my son is not like just like this natural born reader, and this was just like flying past him. It's like he didn't even understand or really grasp the concept from yesterday, but now like we're on to a brand new one. So that's what we did. We did ELA week, and during math week we would be reviewing whatever we learned with the booster cards and with the readers. And so that really helped us try to keep up with the pacing. Regarding the grammar and punctuation, it's also pretty light. So if you take my advice and you do have your children do copy work, or at least write 1 or 2 sentences independently, I would also use that time to reinforce grammar and punctuation. At this level, it's pretty basic. It doesn't really go into much more than just commas by the end of level 1. But those are things that you can easily reinforce during the additional writing time. Geography, I love how they include it in here, but it is really random. Like, I don't feel like my kids really got a grasp of like where things are, because there just didn't seem to be like any rhyme or reason as to why they were talking about this place. Like, it felt like one day they would be talking about Africa, and then like 2 months later they would talk about like some, place in England. And so I don't really feel like they had, like they were connecting the dots because of how it was presented. And now I will say, for the literature, something to keep in mind about this curriculum is that it is a faith-based curriculum, but it also isn't something that's like crazy in your face either. Know that you're probably not going to get a lot of exposure to mainstream classic literature. That was one thing that I felt like was missing. These are all really adorable, and I have so many of their other readers like downstairs. The stories are really sweet and wholesome, and I love them. However, like, I do want my kids to be exposed to more classic literature, even, children level, whether that's, Peter Pan or Winnie the Pooh. That is something that is important to me as a homeschool mom. So that's also something to take into consideration, is that you may need to add additional literature to this curriculum if you really want them to have a well-rounded view when it comes to the subject. Now, regarding the spelling, isn't fabulous, isn't extremely in-depth. They have this accompanying app called the Letter Tiles app, and my kids really liked the Letter Tiles app. It was very fun for them. However, I don't really feel like they were grasping how to actually spell the words. And the spelling just kind of like randomly pops up. I think you're supposed to be like practicing the letter tile spelling, in between when you get to whenever they pop in the next letter tile activity. But from what I remember, it doesn't like explicitly tell you to do that, but I could be wrong because there is so much written on these pages. They are very heavily scripted. And so for me, even as a parent, I'm like, I don't want to read all of this stuff. So a lot of times I find myself just like skimming through it and summarizing it myself. So maybe it wasn't there to remind you, but if you are using the curriculum, remember to continue to practice the letter tiles and the spelling words in between when it prompts you to, because it's not really a lot that it prompts you. So I feel like that about wraps it up. There's really nothing else that I can think of right now that would be beneficial or that I wish I had known prior to using this curriculum. So if you are going to use this curriculum, I want to wish you the best of luck. It really is a great all-and-go curriculum. But there, just like with every curriculum, there are pros and cons. And I know that it's like, this is one of those curriculums that like, you either like love it or you hate it. I'm kind of like in the middle. Like, I feel like I would even like go back to it now that I know what I know. So hopefully these tips will help you using this curriculum and support your kids on their educational journey. I will see you next time.